Good morning, and welcome back. It's the beginning of 2025, and I just wanted to take a quick second to thank everybody who has gone on this journey with us so far, especially right now on our current book in Blackstone, and I'm hoping we have a lot more adventures in 2025. So, get comfy, and let's dive into the book. Chapter 21. Purpose.
After the grief had passed, I remember feeling disappointed in me friend. He was meant to be the romantic hero of me tale. If he was to die, it was to be upon a mound of slain foes. He was not to be battered and drowned. Only later did I realize that, thinking Elayna dead by his own hand, he'd suffered the most mortal wound of all, a broken heart. What I saw back then as a weakness, I now see as human. Struck by staves and stricken with grief, can we believe that our own rational thought would have endured? Only purpose can fortify a man against such an onslaught, and Elayna had been his purpose. Purpose holds us to our goal despite every storm against our progress. A person without it cannot weather life's wicked castings. It is purpose that we hug close for strength, while leaning into the turbulence of fate. Without purpose, we are lost. Jorwin Weaver, The Keetish Cycle.
The half-orc squinted to concentrate on the opposite ridge. This was a land where the sun was unchallenged in an azure sky, and the only clouds were made of dust, kicked up from the scorched earth. He had forsaken his name, so his Durian comrades called him Frangios, the Breaker. They had seen how he hurled himself into battle with no regard for his life, nor for his mounts. Time after time, his size, strength, and recklessness had broken the enemy line. The Jasphah Sultanate fought a mobile war against the plotting Durian infantry, so the Empire needed auxiliary cavalry. Thus, they hired them from conquered lands, or from outside the Empire, especially from the Praektari pony tribes. Frangios had learned to be an excellent rider and a superlative killer. That was all his paymasters wanted, and that was all he had to give. He did not share any camaraderie with his fellow soldiers, and in return they avoided him, talking about him in awed whispers. He slept, he followed orders, and then he slept again. And on battle days, he killed. The Jasfahi knew him too. They named him Kutau, the Destroyer, for his brutal efficiency in battle. He killed as if born to it, like a god of war. That was not to say that he reveled in it. Once the enemy broke, he did not pursue them for the slaughter. Instead, he simply rode back to camp or walked if his horse was, yet again, dead. The officers of the Durian fort of Havernum called him auxiliary because that was what he was. It was a compliment. They could have called him mercenary, except he was cheaper than most hired swords and a lot less trouble. He never argued over the basic wage they paid him. They would have paid him 5 times for his value on the battlefield. Still, he had enough to get drunk and brawl, which he did when forced into a social situation. Where his endless supply of horses came from was a mystery. Only a few senior officers knew the answer. Now, Frangios the auxiliary was waiting patiently for the order to attack. He glanced at the officers huddled in debate. They were reluctant to march across the open ground towards the ridge without knowing where the enemy cavalry was positioned. The drifting dust clouds parted, and he saw the banners of the Jasfahi prince who had dared dispute the Empire's claim to this forsaken land. They rippled yellow and black in the hot breeze above the lines of infantry on the opposite ridge. The force had a corps of light spearmen, no match for Durian legionaries and supposedly 2 wings of cavalry. True Jasfahi power lay in their horses, which was why their absence so unnerved the officers. The Durian commander, an imposing man despite his youth, nodded to his artillery commander who bellowed at the crews to make ready. Apparently, the men adored this commander. He was some kind of hero to them. Frangios no longer believed in heroes. He was just another overdressed fop in his shiny armor with an expensive helmet plume.
Release!
The ballistae loosed their missiles. So they had decided to goad the enemy into an attack. Utterly pointless. This hero commander was one of the great nobles from the homeland cities. He had been in command of this legion for over 2 years, visiting from time to time like a set of toy soldiers, and sending them out to goad the Jasfahi. The battles then had just been skirmishes. Frangios had fought hard in the Empire borderlands, and they had stung Jasfa, enough for the Sultan to dispatch this army under one of his sons. Finally, the pretty boy from the big family had what he wanted, a chance to win himself some glory. The ambitions of this man might kill Frangios, certainly would kill many others. It just depended how fate's dice would fall. He really didn't care.
Release!
The order came again, and the catapults thudded and the ballistae thrummed. Forsaken divine, he swore under his breath. Artillery. The nobility all seemed to think it was more civilized to bombard an enemy from a polite distance. It did work, however. The Jasfahi infantry fell back behind the ridge and out of sight. The officers started another debate. Frangios twisted his hands in his reins. His horse stamped its hooves in anticipation. He'd not named it. He never named his horses, just calling them horse. The horns gave the order to advance across the parched ground. The wind came again and shrouded them in dust. The cavalrymen around them muttered thanks to whichever gods they worshipped. The dust would give some protection from the keen eyes of the Jasfahi archers. Frangios did not care on 2 counts. Firstly, if it was his fate to take an arrow today, then he could do nothing to stop it. Secondly, his prayers were of too little consequence to the Evermighty or his spirits. He had learned that lesson well. Veterans gained instincts for battle, little signs that weigh more heavily on their experienced eye. The half-orc saw too. The first was that the Jasfahi had pulled back without leaving watchers on the ridge. A silly mistake that suggested confused or inexperienced command. Men would be dispatched soon enough to make good the error, but in this moment the enemy was blind. The second was a cloud. This was a landscape that spoke in language of dust. It was off to his right down the slope in the hills. It was thick, kicked up by hooves, not feet, and rose in a column like smoke from a chimney. So the churned earth was trapped in a small space before drifting into the free air. He flared his nostrils and caught the last clue, the scent of horses on the wind. He grinned with his vicious teeth.
"You see something, Frangios?"
asked a Praetari called Alignac. He was no officer, but many of the pony tribesmen followed his lead. He ignored the man. Someone thought they were being clever. Someone was leading his cavalry around the Durian flank through the hidden canyons to attempt a surprise attack on their rear. Amateurs. Jasfa filled its officer ranks from inbred nobility, just like Duria.
"Just as stupid,"
he growled and dug in his spurs. His warhorse snorted in surprise and leapt forwards. The other auxiliaries were immediately pointing at him. They knew Frangios. They trusted the breaker. The whole of the cavalry force dug their heels in and ignored the surprised shouts from their officers.
"Faster!"
he hissed through his teeth and pressed his spurs hard. His horse tossed its head and powered into a full gallop up the slope. They burst over the crest, and the scene unrolled like a map. To his left, the light infantry and archers had only a screen of cavalry. Meanwhile, squadrons of Jasfahi heavy cavalry were hidden in churning clouds down in a dry gully that curved around to his right. Yes, as he had deduced, circling the Durian flank. Easier killing was to be had charging the infantry, not Frangios. Easy kills did not win battles, and they would get caught up in melee while the enemy cavalry circled. No, there was a better target. Below them, the enemy heavy cavalry were showing their backs. Packed tightly at the bottom of the steep slope into the canyons, they were blinded by their dust and deafened by their own noise. They rode in ignorance, navigating the bottlenecks of the rocky hills with little room for maneuver. The half-orc swept his spear right and pulled hard on his reins. He did not care if the other riders followed. They could make their own choice for death and glory. His spirit soared with the drumming of hooves and the momentum of the charge. This was the only way he could ever find what passed for joy. He plunged down the precipitous slope and into the canyon. The thunder of hooves echoing off the gully walls thrilled him. The world closed in, filling with sweat, dust, and battle cries as the other auxiliaries thundered down behind him. The first Judgement to see him then circled their mounts and called warnings. Too late. Hunching behind his spear, screaming defiance, Frangios became Kutal. Hooves, steel, and death exploded in the confines of the canyon. His spear took his first victim in the throat and tore through with such force that the man's head was ripped from his spine. He then twitched the steel tip downwards at the next man to punch it through a thick coat of metal plates sewn into leather. The impact threw the soldier off his mount. His screaming weight yanked the haft downwards. Kutal let it go. He had other tools for killing. Now came the sight that terrified the Judgement. In an assured motion, he gripped the horse with his knees and pressed his feet in his stirrups. His hands drew forth his great blade from across his saddle. Left and right he spun the blade, shearing flesh and breaking bone. In the confines of the dusty stone walls, the best way to make space was to kill and kill again. If he did not recognize a man, he killed him. Arterial red spurted over the sandstone, and rivulets of blood ran down the dry riverbed where only winter rains had flowed before. Kutal had a simple rule. If a man stood against him, he died. With nowhere for them to run, a great many died, and the gully ran with a slurry of mud and blood. One man cast aside his sword and shouted for mercy. That made Kutal pause, but then a passing auxiliary slashed the man across the gullet. Kutal's attention snapped to a warrior with gold-trimmed armor beneath a banner of dusty silks. He was giving orders in a valiant attempt to secure part of the canyon and give an escape route to the beleaguered Judgement cavalry. The half-orc may have once seen the charisma, even heroism of the man, saving what he could in a desperate situation. But Kutal did not care. He charged in for the kill. The warrior in gold shouted orders and pointed at him. Kutal struck left and right, carving a path to his quarry. The commander hurled a spear. His aim was excellent, piercing the chest and heart of Kutal's mount. Feeling the horse collapse, Kutal slipped his feet from his stirrups and slid off backwards, letting the dying steed plunge ahead, wreaking havoc against the Judgement bodyguards trying to protect the man. A noble? A prince even. Kutal did not care. He was an enemy. Other auxiliaries joined him in the attack, and he broke through to strike two-handed at the warrior in gold. His foe's armor was a suit of chain, armor plates, and silk. His helmet was magnificent, but under all the gilding and elaborate design, it was still practical for war. His enemy moved swiftly with sword and shield deflecting his great blade and striking like a viper. They exchanged blows in the thick dust, the clamor of battle all around them. Kutal's battle frenzy was not angry and mindless, but cold and analytical. He watched the other man strike and parry with elegance and skill. But the man was tired. With each exchange, Kutal saw the prince become slower and slower. Now, he surged forward, swinging again and again with the powerful, accurate sweeps of his blade. The prince dodged the first, but the second he was forced to parry with the shield. The prince's angle was bad, and the force of the greatsword shuddered through his shield and into his arm, staggering him. The third blow swept in. A lesser warrior would have died in that moment. Off balance, the prince let gravity have its way. He half fell, half rolled. The greatsword missed him and struck a rock face. It shattered. A memory stalled Kutal. In his mind's eye, a cheating, sniveling white-haired freak laughed at him. He paused, anger and hurt gathering like the crescendo of a storm. The prince lunged from where he crouched, striking for the kill. Kutal was faster. He twisted aside, and the thrusting point missed. Still, the keen edge of the prince's longsword grazed his hips. Kutal dropped on the golden warrior, knees first, crushing him to the dirt, and then raised his broken sword in both hands. The jagged, broken edge may not have been honed, but it was good enough for Kutal. He plunged it downwards, piercing armor, breastbone, and heart. The prince jerked under him, twitched, and then went limp. His helmet rolled off to reveal a young man that had been schooled in literacy, mathematics, and the administration of justice, as well as the art of war. But Kutal did not care. He just grabbed the elegant sword and got up to search for his next kill. Jasfa suffered a disaster that day. Leaderless and stripped of their heavy cavalry, the rest of the Jasfahi army was routed with horrific losses. The Durians celebrated. The half-orc had a bath. As he bathed in the waters of the oasis by Fort Hivernum, the half-orc's mind drifted to the dazzling port of Yugtavia. It was the biggest city near the fort and the center of Durian naval supremacy. There he had been given a completely different name, the Bull. It was not gifted by the soldiers, but by the high-born ladies. He had been on leave in the military port which lay to the west of Hivernum. The Durian ladies lived a different moral code, with the flagrant acceptance of their husbands. With their spouses at sea or on campaign, it seemed socially acceptable to be constantly on the hunt for men. One such lady had servants pull him out of a street gutter where he had collapsed after a drinking binge. They had stripped, washed, and then oiled him. Then they just left him in an ornate atrium decorated with mosaics and sparkling water fountains made from glass. Sore from drink and with no one to kill, he sprawled on the couch listless until the lady came. Then she made him understand exactly what was required. He got invited back. He had nothing better to do, so he went. Then he was invited by her friends, and so he was passed around their social circle. They would always follow the same tiresome routine of offering him bath, oil, and fresh clothes. Then he would be invited to dinner, and eventually their bedchamber. Sometimes he could not be bothered with the formalities. They were just giggling heifers desperate for distraction. On those occasions, when the servants had bathed him, he would just stride naked and dripping into their reception room, push aside the little plates of delicacies to make space on the table, and then give them what they wanted. During that time in Yugtavia, sex became a drug to the Bull. It would dull his misery for a fleeting time, but was neither healing nor satisfying. Glad to return to the sanctuary of the fort, he had resolved never to take leave there again. He despised the flimsy lives of those noble city folk. Only here, in the sun and the dust, did life have meaning by virtue of his proximity to death. He surfaced, and watched the cloud of blood diffuse into the water around him. "Tell me, why cleanse your body, but never offer such a respite to your soul?" The half-orc resisted the reflex to turn in the direction of the voice. It was not easy because every word stung. "I don't listen to priests," he growled, for surely this was the nonsense of a priest. He plunged his head back onto the waters of the oasis before the unwelcome visitor could respond. When he broke the surface, he shook his hair and strode out of the water back to his clothes. Annoyingly, the newcomer was sitting next to them. It was a female, and unabashed by his nakedness. Although she was dressed in delicate Jasfahi trousers and a blouse, she was no fragile maiden. Her frame was muscular and her poise martial. The Bull stirred within, moaning for satisfaction he had denied himself since Yugtavia. He reined it back ruthlessly, for she was no idle creature of pleasure. Runes and sigils covered her skin in bold strokes, each a signature of power. He grabbed his clothes and strode several paces away, turning his back to her. "Last time I saw you, those wounds to your soul were fresh and inflamed with anguish," the intruder went on. "Now I see they are scabbed and filled with the poison of despair." "I don't know what you're talking about." He was already giving the woman too much attention. The water trickling down his back touched a chilling memory of utter loss. He knew her. She had not paid much attention to him then. He would pay none to her now. He shook his head like a dog to scatter both the water and the memory. It had been cold, so cold. Despite the heat of the evening sun, the memory made his skin prickle with goosebumps. The intruder persevered. "Untreated scabs become scars, and scars disfigure forever." The half-orc slapped the side of his head to clear the water from his ear, and dried himself with a fraying cloth. It was too thin to take much water away, so he dried himself slowly and methodically, letting the waning desert sun do the rest. She prattled on. "So here we are again. Back then, when I pulled you from the river, you were naked, wet and dying on the outside. Now you are naked, wet and dying on the inside." The half-orc wrestled on his soldier's tunic. The material was stiff with sweat. He would have washed it next, but he had to get away from this woman. He had drowned his past in blood to forget it. He did not care how his journey to this point had started. The morass of that tragedy was too deep, too painful, too dangerous. No, he did not want to remember it at all. He only knew that he had been cursed to live when others had died. He should have died. He had wanted to die.
Elayna is alive.
He tied the thongs of his tunic while the words hung around him in a fog of confusion. 3 beats of his heart, and then he turned to stare at the woman, the witch warrior. "I don't know you," he lied bluntly, not wanting to pay heed to such painful memories. But what if Elayna was alive? Hope? He hated it. A true joy stirred deep inside him. He quashed it. He grabbed his belt a little too hastily. It whipped in the air and scattered gritty soil into the oasis. Dozens of tiny circles appeared on the smooth surface. The woman watched him impassively. She was sitting in a casual position, one of her hands playing with a pebble, passing it between agile fingers, making it move as if alive. Frangios attacked threats, and Catal killed them. Neither of them were of use to him now. He had no patience or skills for clever retorts to fend her off, so it was naked pain that gave him voice. "Go away!" She stared at him, unwavering. "And let your injuries stiffen from scabs to scars?" He tightened his belt about his tunic and pulled on his cavalry boots, setting his gaze purposefully on the horizon. This intruder offered him nothing but a return to suffering.
"And leave you permanently maimed, whilst guilt poisons your soul and eats away the rest of your days?"
She continued forcefully.
"Now I have seen you and your hurt. I will leave you for now. There can be joy in your heart again. You just need to be brave enough to let it out. She is alive."
The woman grinned like the first slice of sun at the start of a new day. He fled through the trees, stumbling over the stubby vegetation that hugged the ground to capture the night dew. He stopped to clutch a tree and draw in a ragged breath. He did not mean to, but he let out a groan that betrayed the emotions festering within. The effort of years had deadened the pain, and now it came back because of 3 words. Elayna is alive. False hope was cruel. A calmer, wiser voice inside him told him it did not matter. If she was alive, and he was here, then she would be safer. He inhaled deeply and found his center. Yes, safe from the savage orc within him, safe from his instinct to destroy. The voice of a Durian floated towards him. "I heard it over here!" People were coming towards him. He could not face anyone, not now. He looked for an escape, but they were already close and blocking his path back to the camp. The Durian was an officer and pointed at him through the trees. "You there. Why are you away from the Hectari?" Authority. Exactly what he needed to escape his past. Orders without obligation. Duty without decisions. "Bathing, sir." Smartly, he made the Durian salute, fist to chest. Then he realized it was none other than his senior commander, Valiados Thanianas. "My lord," he added hastily. The Durian looked him up and down. "Not celebrating?" "No, lord." "Good. Come with me." The Durian noble dismissed the 2 officers who had been with him and walked away with long, languid strides. Confused, the half-orc fell in behind him and followed him back to the fort gates. For a noble, Valiados was very relaxed. He nodded casually to the guards on the gate as their own fists slammed in salute, and gestured to his secretary as he entered his quarters within the fort walls. "Wine, please, Ialos, for 2. The slender man made a few minimal gestures to other servants who sprang into action. "Anything else, my lord?" Ialos said. Valiados gave a single shake of his head and smiled. "No, that will be all." The secretary knew his master well, and motioned all the other servants to leave with him. The half-orc was now alone with Valiados. He stood waiting for more orders, outwardly calm while wrestling his pain back into the nadir of his soul. It was a struggle that only showed in the depth of his steady breathing. Valiados ignored him at first as he checked through a neat pile of dispatches. Finally, he muttered a distracted, "Right," Then, and waved the half-orc to a table, I want your opinion. The half-orc flinched. His opinion? As auxiliary, he had never exchanged a single word with the Legion commander until now. What did he have that was worth saying? And opinions carried consequences. Lord, I'm just a soldier. Tell me who you want to kill, and I'll do it. Soldier is not about killing, it's about winning. Baliados poured 2 goblets. Raising one to the half-orc with his left hand, he pinned him with his sharp green eyes. Furthermore, I think you know that already. He swallowed uncomfortably. He had misjudged this man. He had the manner of a professional soldier, not a superficial glory-seeker. What do the men call you? Baliados asked. A strange question. Most would have asked, what is your name? Oh, but he had been given so many names. Now his true name was dead, and every one of them was an assignation of damnation. Frangios. Ah, the breaker. Baliados shook his head with a knowing smile. I saw you at work today. It's well earned. You have proved to be an asset in the front line, but there's so much more to you. I will call you Preto. Preto meant protector. He realized what the man had asked, without asking. The responsibility jarred against him. He studied the handsome lord and wondered if this was a man he could follow, a leader who could give him purpose. Someone he would bodyguard and give his life for. The Legion commander raised the goblet in his left hand a fraction, reminding him to accept it. Still, he hesitated. Oh, come now. You're not one of those superstitious types who think left-handed people are unlucky. No, my lord. Just unfamiliar with drinking with my betters. The easy nature of the noble coaxed his tongue to loosen more. Though in truth, bad luck is one of the few things I still believe in. He took the goblet. Ha! Baliados laughed warmly and nodded. But if there is bad luck, there must be good luck, no? The great spirit Anaxos and his celestial bureaucracy can plan as much as they wish. But believe me, men of greatness make their own destiny. Luck is the credit one receives for good foresight or a well-considered gamble. Bad luck, he shrugged it away. That can be the design of others as much as a bad roll of the dice. Baliados gestured to a map unrolled on the table. It was held open by bronze weights stamped with the lion crest of Hastalianus. So, Preto, did you know you changed this part of the world today? It was just another battle, Lord, he replied carefully. Now you're being obtuse. You know it wasn't just another battle. For starters, it was much larger. Baliados tapped a finger on the Jasfahi city of Kopa. Satrap Sephara had been in secret talks with us for months. Prince Asarum, the man I understand you killed, was here because the Sultan of Jasfa had rightly doubted Sephara's loyalty. And now, Lord? And now we see the culmination of several years' work. I will make Sephara a client king of the empire, and Durian will take the lion's share of the spice trade. This is beyond a humble soldier, Lord, Preto said cautiously. Only if that soldier humbles himself beneath his aptitude. I want your opinion, Preto. His finger stabbed 3 points on the map. These forts are still loyal to Jasfa. With the Sultan's main force broken, I need to strike quickly to clear the way through to Kopa. Only that bold action will give Sephara the confidence to rebel. Preto stared at the map and then back to the man standing across from him. 2 years he had fought for this man, draining the strength of Jasfa in dozens of bloody skirmishes. He'd not stopped to think it pointless, for he had chosen it as a way of life. Blessed divine! This man was a different breed of Durian, neither a wealthy fop nor a stiff-assed fool. He was clever, and the underlying tension in his lean body marked his instinct for action. Just as the prince's beautifully crafted sword killed as well as an infantryman's hack, so this young man would make war as well as any grizzled general. "You drew them out," he realized. "You tricked them into fighting in poor terrain for cavalry." Veliados beamed. "It's always good to have one's work appreciated." Prato's eyes were opened. He had not seen the bigger game being played. All this time, House Thelianus had been stirring the cauldron of politics. They had been preparing the sauce for Jasfa's goose. Now Veliados had come to pluck and cook it. He gave his head a small shake. So be it. He didn't care. He could not allow himself to care. Prato leaned over the map. "If my lord wishes my thoughts." So they talked of war. Suggestion by suggestion. Debate by debate. The half-orc felt himself tested. This man was as subtle as he was clever. A grin spread over Veliados' face, as if he had won some private bet. "Excellent." The commander's dazzling white smile tempted him to a greater show of initiative. "It's not enough to support Shafara with strikes at these forts," Prato argued, sweeping his hand across the ink squares. "They may be closer to Kopa, but you'll have to take this fort here." He stabbed a larger black square drawn in a pass between the mountains to the east. "Ferazda?" "Yes, my lord. Control Fort Ferazda, and at worst, you'll slow Jasfa's response time. At best, you'll block the pass and secure all the fertile lands to the west." "So, how would you do that?" Prato suspected his commander already had the answer, but he gave his own anyway. So there they stood over the borderlands of the empire like titans, the golden Durian hero and the bitter god of battle, plotting the fate of nations. That's the end of Chapter 21, Purpose. Next time, we return to Blackstone to find out how they fare against their unknown saboteur, while Vibnia helps Elayna track down her father's killer. Another chapter down, and we're so glad you're along for the ride. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like, a share, or a comment. It truly helps. See you next week with the next part of Blackstone.